work-life balance. My name is Emily Sandilands. I am the community builder here at Zingerman. I'm going to be your host today, and I'm thrilled to be here alongside our presenter, fabulous Zingerman trainer, Timo Anderson. Hi, Timo.
Hi, how are you?
We also have Mara Ferguson, who is our keynote liaison. Here behind the scenes, she's going to be monitoring the chat and those questions with me throughout the duration of today's webinar. We are coming to you live from all over Ann Arbor, Michigan, from the Zingerman offices where Timo is to my dining room. But we would love to hear where you're tuning in from. So if you feel free to navigate to the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen there and drop in your location. Let's do a roll call. London, Washington, New Jersey,
New York,
Ann Arborites here. Alabama, great.
Carolina, Boulder.
Great, keep those coming in. This is really fun. As those come in, I'm going to just go over a few other housekeeping items. As far as the format of today's webinar, we're going to be presenting here for about 40 minutes or so, and we're going to leave some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Feel free to submit any questions you may have by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. It should be right near that chat button that you just clicked. We're going to try our best to get to as many of your questions today as we can. If we do not get to your question, not to worry, we will get back to you with an answer over email in the days to come. We also have closed captioning now available on our webinars. If you want to turn that on and you navigate to the bottom of your Zoom screen there near the chat and the Q&A button, there should be a closed captioning button. You can get the captions on screen by clicking the show subtitle button, or you can see the full live transcript right there next to our presentation today by clicking view full transcript, and the transcript should pop up right to the right of your screen. Last item of business, we are recording today's webinar, and we will be sending out the recording and the slides here in the days to come, as well as posting it in our library on zingtrade.com, where it will live for all of time with all of the webinars we've done if you want to check those out in your free time. And I think that's it for housekeeping, Timo. I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Thank you so much, Emily. It's wonderful to be here with you and to be present with you all. I was trying to keep up with the flow of people in the chat, and it was just impossible. I had no idea. I couldn't read that fast, and they just popped up and flew through. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of interest in this idea of work-life balance. I was doing in prep for this webinar, I decided to go, like it used to be, if you were doing presentations, you go to Encyclopedia Britannica and get the definition of something. And I decided I was going to go to the oh great God of Google and check to see how many hits I would get on this work-life balance concept. And it came up and it quickly produced 1.76 billion different responses. So obviously there's just a bit of interest in this concept and this idea of work-life balance and trying to manage and make that work. There's many tools. There's 5 steps. There's 12 steps. There was 42 different responses too. It was the numbers were very interesting. I was reminded by Emily, our wonderful community manager, that listicles are prime hits on Google, and I saw a lot of listicles on how to manage work-life balance. I found it interesting. I was driving home from a training yesterday, and they were talking some about the new Prime Minister of New Zealand and how she was going to balance this idea of being pregnant and having a baby while being Prime Minister of a country. And she said, I'm just going to do it like everyone else does, whether I'm male or female. I'd have a small child and have to manage it. And so I think this is one of those key thoughts. And oftentimes we think about this work-life balance as this push and pull, so work or life. And it feels to me oftentimes like a two-legged stool. And a two-legged stool is great for hiking when you want to take a quick break, if you want to lean on it, if you want to be able to help balance it. But the problem with a two-legged stool is that a two-legged stool takes constant attention. Because if you sit on a two-legged stool and then you stand up, it falls over. It's not going to stay standing unless it's stuck in the ground, but it's not going to stay up. It's not going to be supported. And so we want to think about this idea of work-life balance and how we can make it with less kind of constant attention or constant focus. What are some of those things that we have done here at Zingerman's that have as some tools? We talk about this in our mindful self-management workshop, and this is part of it and kind of comes from some of those elements. But I wanted to kind of think about this one in particular and expand on this idea because we never sorry, I never have enough time to talk about it when I'm doing that workshop because we have other things we try to cover. I want to start with a quote that I found also on this one that I thought was very interesting from Thomas Edison, thinking about time is really the only capital that any human has and the only thing they can't afford to lose. So time is this thing that we all have 24 hours. Every single person in the world, every single member of our population has a single 24-hour day. Every single day, however we decide to use it, but we have 24 hours. And so thinking about that, I'd like to start, and I'm going to move us forward with this. I'd like you to do this quick exercise and share with me. I would love to see what is your one sentence note to time. So if you could please type into chat, you get one sentence, and please don't make it a run-on because we want to make it a nice, tidy sentence. But think about that one sentence you would like to write to time. If time was a person, what would you write? I'd love to see some, and I'll read some of those answers as you start putting them into our chat box. Slow down. Yeah. Time, you stress me out. Slow down. Rewind. There's never enough of you. Why do you go so fast sometimes and slow others? Try to do too much in my given time. Yeah. I savor you. Show me how I can use you wisely. Be kind, be generous, be patient, take care of this moment. Freeze the special moments, slow down in those. Do you have a pause button? That one I can absolutely agree with. I'd love to just hit pause every once in a while, just get in a little more. I need more of you. Yeah. Let's enjoy each other's company. It's a very nice phrasing of that, Afia. I wish there were days where there were more of you and other days I can't get rid of you fast enough. Working to invest you and maximize the return. Can we have more consistent speed? Sure, right? How can I find the best 8x8x8 balance? And time, please remind me to be present. Yeah, I was thinking about these questions and thinking about my, and it goes back and forth. And I absolutely agree with some of your thoughts that you're thinking there. Sometimes you go too fast and sometimes you go too slow. I was driving from a training in northern Michigan yesterday, and I just wanted time to go faster. I wanted to speed up so I could get home, right? 4.5-hour drive. And I was like, I just want this to kind of go through faster. And yet time I was spending with the client up in northern Michigan, I wanted that to slow down because it was really great and compelling and everyone was very excited. And so really thinking about those pieces, I agree that it goes back and forth, and I have kind of this dualistic relationship with time that I want it to slow down and speed up at the same time. And I was reminded of this as I was thinking about this presentation, and I was working at home, and one of the books I happen to have is from having 2 children is The Missing Piece by Shel Silverstein. And so thinking about this idea, and these are just 2 slides that I pulled that I thought were representative, to think about this idea of ideal time, of having time to smell a flower, to be able to relax. And if you don't know the story of the missing piece, he's rolling along looking for his missing piece. And that missing piece would fill that triangular space right below his eye. Some people consider that the mouth, but that's the missing piece. And in rolling, he can never roll very fast because he's got this missing piece. So he kind of roll, bump, roll, bump, roll, bump. But there's time to stop and see and engage and focus. Now, later, he finds that missing piece. And he moves so fast that it could not stop to talk to a worm or to smell a flower anymore. So he found that perfect ideal thing. He was full, he was complete, he was all of these things, but he also couldn't slow down. He didn't have the ability. And so the end of the story, the moral that we get from this is this idea that sometimes that ideal that we think might be the most perfect solution, being completed, makes it impossible for us to do the things that we fully enjoy, right? The pieces that we're doing. So in the end, the missing piece gives back and takes out that piece that he found that filled him and put himself back into the time because he could control the speed and the roll and the experience he had of moving through life. So thinking about that as a framework, another quote that I found that I liked about this one is, we need to do a little better job of putting ourselves higher on our to-do list. The missing piece was looking through and rolling and was thinking that he would have his ideal situation when he was fulfilled and became complete. But he instead had to prioritize himself, had to connect to it and say, wait a minute, I need to put myself higher on this list, and I want to be able to talk to the worms or smell the flowers. And I won't take credit for that quote. That was Michelle Obama. I just found it and thought it was very telling to land and hit here. So here at Zingerman's, we have some tools, and many of you who've been a participant in our organizational presentations or trainings will recognize this business perspective chart. And some of you will say, well, what the heck does this have to do with work-life balance? I promise, follow me along. There is a path, and I think we'll get some really good results. But I'd like to talk through this for a moment. This business perspective chart takes the outside edge as our mission, the Zingerman's experience. And at Zingerman's, we try to make sure we have that mission in mind with every single thing we do. It frames our efforts every single day. It is our North Star. So that mission thinks about sharing the Zingerman's experience, how we can create that for anyone and as many people as possible, showing love and care in our actions. Inside of that frame, we start with our vision. What does success look like? And currently, Zingerman's has a 2032 vision. Zing Train, our business, has a 2035. Myself, Timo Anderson, has a 2033 vision that I've written. But vision is a tool we use to help us get to our results. And at Zingerman's, we measure our results on our triple bottom line. No, it's not people, planet, and profit. It is great food, great service, and great finance. And we think about each of these individually, and it allows us to make sure we're giving that great experience and giving the great service, keeping our bottom line, our financial bottom line in track, and making sure we have great food. How we get between this vision and results, we think about our guiding principles. This may be your values, your core beliefs. And then we have systems and culture that allow us to use systems to be more efficient and effective. The culture is what we actually do, and we try to pull those together to make them into one straight line. All right, so if we have all these in place, now what does this have to do with this personal one? Well, what we've realized is that this framework, and as both Emily and Mara know, and any of you who've heard me talk about things, this scaffolding can be used in a different way, because if we have the framework, the scaffolding in place, we can think about it differently. You'll notice there's one word that's different. We've added a word. It's my vision, my results, and my guiding principles. What are my components here? And we want to think about this my because we've made this a personal perspective chart. And I think when we want to think about work-life balance, we really want to be clear, what is that thing we're going to be? How are we working through this process? The outer yellow rim is available for you to write your mission statement. What is the thing that is your North Star? What is your guiding focus? What are you aiming at every single time? What is your vision for the future? And then what's a little different, you have your principles. I'm sure some of you have systems and culture, and we'll talk about those. But then thinking about my results. And I'm going to mention, if you notice in my results, now we have 3 result lines, and I'm going to share what those are in just a second. But I'd like you to think about a 3-legged stool versus a 2-legged stool. 3-legged stool, you could stand up, walk away from. It's going to be totally standing there waiting for you when you get back. And so I like to think about, if we have that 3-legged stool, it makes it a lot easier to not spend all of our time focusing on balancing, but instead focusing on meeting all 3 of these different results. So let's try some of these on for size. The first is work. Most of you can assume that. I'll talk a little bit more and kind of break that down into success and kind of functionality in a little bit. But work is one of your results. I'm going to work. What am I getting out of my work? What am I getting financially? All of those pieces. But my results is, one of them is work. The second one is not life. Our belief, again, is that all of your work, all of the parts are your life. What we want to think about here is that differentiation between work and home. So what's going on at home? the people in and around your house, your friends, your family, your animals, your pets, the space that within your home and in your home community. And how are we spending and balancing our time there? And here's the one that gets most people and catches them off guard, of having self as the third leg of that stool. Right? Thinking about this third leg of the stool, having self, now balances out the work and our home, which is usually considered work and life balance. Because we want to make sure that self is preserved as an independent thing, because each of us have a self need. And when we're thinking about these pieces, this is usually what we're doing here, is thinking about how do we validate and care for self? How do we put in space for self? Right? How do we think about these pieces? So I'd like to go into detail on self for just a moment and thinking about this relationship to time. Because here's where I get into this idea of, where do I want to be? How do we want it to work? How do we want these pieces to function? If I'm thinking about home and work and self, one of the things I thought about for a long time is that I'm busy. And I don't know if you've heard this word, but I think of it now as a 4-letter word. One of those 4-letter words we tell children not to say, that I'm busy. I'm too busy. I know when we used to have in-person conversations before the pandemic, you'd say, hey, how are you? And I'd say, I'm busy. It wasn't fine. It's, I'm busy. I'm really so busy. I have so many things to do. I'm so busy. And that was kind of the cool thing to be, was busy. Well, what I will ask you is, when we're thinking about that busy, who's making that choice? Because each of these things, this balance between work, home, and self, is a choice. So if we're thinking about that choice, how do we make it work? I'm reminded when about 4 or 5 years ago, both of my children were in a number of athletic and musical and dance related things. And I was talking to someone saying, oh my gosh, my life is so crazy. I work all day and then I have this. My wife and I are trying to figure out who's picking things up and travel and doing this and going to drop kids off and pick kids up and getting fast food and all these other pieces and all these amazing things that we are trying to do. And I kept saying, oh my goodness, it's so busy. Why am I so busy? Why is everything so crazy? It's hectic. It's frantic. And then I realized, in my work, home, self balance, this was part of my home. And I was allocating a big part of my time to try to give my children experiences. No one told me I had to take them to dance class. There's no have to. No one assigned them and made me take care of it, except myself. And my wife and I started to have this conversation of who chose to put them into 5 dance classes and 3 gymnastics classes and a musical theater program. It wasn't so much that there was a have to, it was a we'd made this choice. And we chose to allocate time in that direction. And it was that discussion and that intentionalization of saying, yes, we have lots going on, but we're choosing to have highly engaged children in amazing opportunities. Words have power. And those powerful phrases in switching the brain of saying, I'm so busy, I can't get everything done, to I've chosen to create these experiences, is an amazing thing to think about. Right? How do we start to process that I'm doing this home thing? And it's not an extension of work, of me driving and those other things that I might associate with work, of driving and transporting myself and transporting my child, but it's actually part of home. It's creating something for the people who are in my home experience, to engage with those things and allow them to talk and experience and have those other things. The third one is self. And this is the one I really think about the most as I start to process this personal perspective chart of making and scheduling time for self. Because if you think about your time, how much do you schedule for yourself on there? Some of you may have bike rides. Tony, I know you're here and I know you schedule hikes so that you can go take some pictures. right? Being able to do these things that intentionally benefit you, that benefits your spirit, your physical selves, but also just to give yourself some space. I don't know about you, but Game of Thrones was required viewing, and I watched it on time at 9 p.m. on Sundays because I wanted to know and to be able to talk about it all week. But when that's time, that's an hour. And if it's every week, then that's an hour per week, which is 4 hours, which is half of a workday that I've now dedicated to watching something. I found time for that. Maybe it's reading. Maybe it's getting a fantasy book or reading some other things, being able to get through that fantastical component, or maybe doing some learning or poetry, whatever those hobbies may be, but making sure there's some time. For me, that self thing up until the pandemic was that I played basketball every Sunday, 3 seasons of the year indoors. I'd done that for over 10 years. Now, let me share how much that counts. Because for me, it was something I dedicated and scheduled and said I wouldn't move around. I even did travel for training gigs. I moved travel so I could play basketball. I knew it was that important. So I would leave at 9:30 in the morning, play basketball from 10 until 12, and then get back between 12:30 and 12:45. So I've now taken 3.5 hours out of a weekend, half of a day, half of a working day, in order to process myself and use physical energy and get out some of those raw emotions of getting fouled and screaming or yelling or getting excited and having that adrenaline going, because I found time for that thing, for that space. I made and put it on the schedule and didn't move it. It wasn't an available option. My wife knew that we didn't have brunches on Sunday morning. We had them on Saturday morning with friends. Because those 3 seasons, everything except for summer, I was playing basketball because that was a space that I needed in order to be a better self in my home and work areas. So in thinking about balancing these pieces, where does work, how much does work get? How much does home get? How much does self get? And it's balancing those 3, and it's not on a daily basis, because if I did that on Sundays, my whole schedule would be out of whack because half of the day was towards self. But it's looking at it over a week or a month, or thinking about it over that type of process so that we can make sure we're allocating it how we are choosing to do so. So let's think about that work component. Working in the business, working on the business, and working on myself. We like to think about your work being allocated into these 3 different things. If I'm working in the business, it might be working the register. It might be doing some pieces along the way of helping a staff person bag some groceries, or it might be talking to a customer about a product. It might be any of those pieces that make the business function on a day-to-day basis. Working on the business is your strategic planning, performance reviews, hiring, conferences, trade shows, research, right? And thinking about that idea of working on the business to make it so it's going to have the opportunity to grow, and then working on myself, right? Taking webinars like this one, workshops, reading, visiting other organizations, having questions, having conversations with people who are nearby. So that work area can be in these 3 categories. And I'd love for you to take just a moment and do some percentage work. I don't need you to share with me, but I'm going to give you a minute to think about what is this percentage of time you feel you're working in the business, doing the job of the task of being in the business and producing your products and making them work. What percentage of your time is working on the business? Where are you going? How is it working? What do we need to work on next? Strategic planning and bigger goals. And then working on yourself. And just write down those numbers on a piece of scratch paper, and they have to equal 100. You can't go over 100. Once you get them done, put them with the number, comma, number, comma, number, and put them into chat so we can see what different people have for percentages of splitting up, working in the business, working on the business, and working on yourself. 50, 25, 25, nice. 30, 30, 40, that's really productive. 60, 30, 10, 30, 0, 70. Okay, 70, 10, 20, 60, 30, 20. Right, 70, 20, 10. Diana, that one seems like what my standard that I've heard before. I'm loving some of the things you have here. Elena, the 40, 45, 50, 40, 10. Yeah, 80, 10, 10, Rosalind. I've seen that one a few times. Joe of 80, 10, 10. Okay, 40, 40, 20. Nice split for those individuals. 75, 15, 10. Right, and I'd ask you to think about that current one. Now take just half a second. If that's the current state, the first number you shared, what is your desired state? What's that variation? What's the difference between those two? Same percentages, working in the business, working on the business, and working on yourself. What would you like to have? 40, 40, 20, 5, 20, 75, okay. I'm looking at that last number, and self is one of those key, huge things. See some big self numbers. Okay, 60 is a one for Colleen. So I'd like to think about this for a moment, and I want to change the rules just a bit. Because when we do this, they seem very cut and dry, black and white, in the business, on the business, working on myself. But I'll challenge you to think about this for a moment. Because I think this is where some of that work balance gets really kind of messy in our brains. We feel like if we're doing the tasks, right? If we're training, if we are working with someone in a business meeting, if we are putting groceries into a bag, doing those kind of mundane tasks in the business, we can't be working in the business and doing anything else. But I would ask you to think about it. If you're doing those tasks, let's say you're putting groceries into a bag and helping get customers through the line, right? While you're doing that, can you be working on the business? Because you might notice, what are the things going into the bag? What are the things that people are purchasing? Are there some trends that you didn't realize because you haven't been hands-on and looking at the things going into bags? Are you hearing something from the customer about that new product you just put in or the special you have and how excited they were and how they're telling people about it? And so you're getting some research simultaneously to doing the mundane tasks, the working in the business, the grit of getting your business done, while working on the business and knowing what you could be thinking about for moving forward. Secondarily, you might be there and see some of your other staff doing some things. You're watching them engage with the customer. And so you might be working on yourself and saying, wow, how might I start to share feedback with this person in a more effective way? Because I haven't been really good at giving George feedback and thinking about how I want to share feedback with him while I'm doing this mundane task. And in that point, you're actually working on all three of these levels at the same time. In the business, packing the groceries, working on the business, listening and watching George engage with customers, working on myself. How can I get training to have him change some of the have to words to opportunity words? So I challenge you to think about, how can I work on multiple levels simultaneously and be aware of those different levels? Not get stuck in the, I have to do this, so I can't think about anything else, but saying, I am working on this because it's required of the business right now, but I'm working on the business by making the most of this moment and doing what I can to extract it to help the business grow. I think of this because this is the key effort where we start to go, how do we manage our time in our work so we aren't feeling like our work on the business has to work outside of our 8 to 10 hours that we are at the work that we're doing currently? How do we maximize those hours we're spending at work to be most effective in working on myself, so that doesn't have to be outside of work? It doesn't impact my work-home self-balance. It is in the work time, it is in that work percentage that I'm really getting in and digging into those pieces. How do you get to those ideal percentages? I would ask you to allocate and over allocate because you're working on things simultaneously. You can't go above 100%, but can you be doing things and know that part of that time, if it's let's say it's 30 minutes, right? If you're working on all three, then you would give each of them 10 minutes and we perfectly allocated 33.3, 33.3, 33.3. Because you were actively, intentionally, and mindfully working on all three levels. Our brain is a really capable tool. And so thinking about that capable tool and using it on all three levels simultaneously, we're not multitasking because that has been proven to be neurologically impossible. But we're intentionally flipping back and forth between these three different areas of our brain and assessing them and capturing that information so that we can be most productive and use our time most efficiently. Now, we never like to give trainings without giving some sort of tool. And whether you like this one or not, this is one that we know functions as a way to kind of prioritize and think. Eisenhower started it, Covey uses it in the quadrants and really thinks about these four quadrants and categories of how things are working. Quadrant one, Eisenhower puts is the work you just do. It's the crisis, it's the pressing problems, it's the driven things, the things that we have to do, and we get, unfortunately, results of stress and burnout. We have a lot of crisis management that we're going through there. It's the urgent and important. And I will say this is oftentimes the in the business. In addition to quadrant three, the urgent and not important. This is working in the business. Oh my goodness, the staff called off. I have to go work the line. Oh my goodness, I have to this. I feel out of control because I don't know how things are going to work. And I'm being pulled back and forth. I'm getting pulled out of what I'm trying to do. My focus is interrupted on a regular basis. I don't get to go and answer emails intentionally. I'm answering quickly and getting back. I have meetings, but I'm always kind of all over the place. There's a lot of short-term focus. Working on the business is really thinking about that quadrant two, not urgent, but important. Writing those performance reviews, building relationships, getting the preparation, the scheduling. We think of visioning and planning and strategic planning, all of those pieces, right? And putting them in place so that we're capable of being ready for those next things and growing the business in the direction that we want it to be able to go to. Quadrant four is that category where you say, okay, well, there's time wasters, there's other things. And I will say some of these are key self-efforts. It's an opportunity to intentionalize. I need to go outside and walk around the block. Some people may say it's a time waster for me to walk across from Zing Train over to coffee to get a coffee I don't really need. But the energy I get, the positive energy I get from going, engaging with the amazing staff we have at coffee, talking with them a couple minutes, getting some caffeine, walking in the sunshine, breathing fresh air, and then coming back has value that I don't get to do in any other way. Because if I try to walk around my office or walk around the training room that I'm in right now, it doesn't have the same impact. The suggestion from Eisenhower is also thinking about, is it possible for those quadrant threes to delegate some of those things, right? Opportunity to minimize your involvement in that and delegate those to trained or opportunistic staff who are able to help and make some of those things work. Yeah, Elena, why is quadrant four not important? A lot of people think of this as kind of the wasteful quadrant. And so they think about it that I'm not doing anything that actually benefits those other pieces. So we throw the things into this quadrant that people think of it as negatives, right? Where we're just kind of hanging out, we're not doing anything, I'm wasting time on Facebook or doing other things. And so I think about it, there's some possibility, right? That quadrant four has some real value. It's not urgent for me to walk, but I might say it's important. So maybe it is. Walking might be considered a quadrant two because it's recreation and relaxation at that moment. I think most people would say walking over and getting coffee is something that's in quadrant four because I'm wasting time. And so that's considered the wasteful. I'd absolutely agree, Elena, that wellness is dependent on many of these things. And sometimes checking your social media is a way to just completely decompress. I'll look forward to looking up that song, Alexandra, as a way to see what wasted time he likes to talk about. So I want to end, I want you to think about this as a moment. Think about how you're intentionally spending this. I saw another piece of data that said 15 minutes a day is equal to 1 day a month. So 15 minutes a day that we spend on these things, thinking about what am I doing with that time? We always talk about not having enough time, but I want to think about how are we valuing our time as we leave? I'd like you to think about how am I using it to its most effectiveness? How am I allocating it to my work? Am I allocating it to my home or to myself? How can I maximize it and do those things that we really want to try to get done? With that, I'd like to share that we do have additional resources at zingtrain.com. You can reach us directly at zingtrain@zingermans.com. We have books, pamphlets, free resources, blogs, past webinars, articles, and virtual workshops. And I would love to answer any other questions that popped up that I didn't get to on chat or that have come since I started talking.
Wonderful. Thank you, Timo. Thanks everyone for dropping some questions there into chat or into the Q&A box. If you have any, feel free to drop them in. We would love to answer your questions. Mara has also dropped a link to our mindful self-management workshop that is happening May 18th, where we'll dig into a lot of this stuff in more depth. And Timo, I believe you're leading that. Is that right?
I am not actually. That'll be one of the ones
Okay.
that I'm not getting to. It'll be Ariana and Katie who will be leading that one this session. So
Okay.
Katie, our managing partner, and Ariana is one of another of our amazing trainer staff.
Fabulous. So a few of our other trainers. Great. Well, I do have a question here. Let me pull it up from Ellen. How do we get past the sense of time needing to be so tightly scheduled? She says, I miss having a sense of flow. I hate the feeling that things need to happen in 30-minute increments with my eyes on the clock.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I don't know when it shifted, but there's the allocation of making sure there's time for self feels like it's the only functional way to kind of manage it now. I know I love the idea of flow. You can talk to both Emily and Mara, and they will tell you that I like schedules less than almost anyone here at Zingtrain. And I will move and do as much as possible. I don't even sit down for trainings because I don't like to be kind of locked in. I would say the thing is, what's happened is worse, and I think it's gotten worse during the pandemic, thinking about this idea that we don't have any boundaries between things. And so schedules start to become a boundary tool. How do I kind of block off some of this time? And if you don't want it to be in half-hour increments of saying, okay, I'm going to do this, it might be that you say, okay, I have nothing scheduled, but I'm not going to schedule anything for 2 hours, so I have some flexibility. What is that chunk of time where I can feel like I can manage, but I don't want to allocate to something specifically? So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to do half-hour meeting, half-hour meeting, half-hour meeting, half-hour coffee, half-hour meeting, half-hour lunch, half-hour whatever, and have everything allocated down to the minute, saying, okay, I've got 2 hours and here's the 3 things I want to prioritize. I'm shutting my door, not talking to staff, pausing my email and saying, what do I want to do on this list? Do I want to work on my Covey quadrants or my Eisenhower quadrants and kind of allocate? There's a lot of research or belief that 1 hour of planning leads to 10 hours of effectiveness. Right? So getting that organization in, starting to put these ideas in place of saying, okay, I need some time to process this overall. So maybe allocating the hour that helps you get into a flow for the rest of that day. Some people talk about the idea of the night before. Okay, let's prioritize our list and kind of put things in place so I don't have the 30-minute increments. I have a few calls, but I'm going to do this project first because it's the thing I don't like the most. And then this project next and this thing next so I can have them all done by the end of the day. And so you allocate 30 minutes at the end of each workday to say, what does tomorrow look like? That would align with our vision concept of what does it look like when tomorrow's successful and I get to all of these things. I would be wary though, be careful, because if you have Here's what it looks like if it's successful. If you don't totally meet that, it might feel like you are a failure, and the energy from that can be negative. So give yourself some space to say, wow, I had 5 things on the list, I got 4 done. That's really a much more productive day than it could have been if I had no list. So giving yourself some space, because things come up, and knowing Murphy's Law, if you have 10 things on the list, you're not going to get to all of them. But if we have the list and we get to 8, it's a much better start.
Absolutely. Yeah, great points. Jessica has asked, how often do you have to change your vision as time goes on?
So for us, vision is written to an endpoint. So mine goes until 2033. Once I've made it final, unless it is no longer inspiring or no longer strategically sound, I don't change it. It's not kind of a shifting tool. It's a written document that says, where do I want to be? And it's my preferences that I've decided on, and said, here's where I want to be at a certain point. Now, Zingerman wrote our vision for 2025. We have a pandemic that has completely and utterly shifted our business from 100% in-person training to 100% virtual training. Here's what's amazing. We haven't changed that vision yet. We may have to, but we've written small visions right now to help us get back to what does success look like. But our overall vision is actually still in alignment. We are in alignment with where that goal is. And by 2025, we still think we can get to most of those things. So it's writing down and kind of writing your preferences and your excitements and where you are excited to be and what you're inspired about. We're not going to change it unless we get rid of the whole thing and start over. We don't just change parts and little pieces. We want to have, okay, it's still inspiring. Let's go for it. It's going to be harder than it might have been 2 years ago, but we still want to get there. As long as we are still inspired and feel like it's strategically sound and we can get there, we're not going to change the vision.
Yeah, we actually had the experience, I think, yesterday in an all-team meeting where it might have been our weekly huddle, where we were working on something and we were like, we put that in the vision, and look, it's
Yeah.
coming to life even after the pandemic. So that's, or in the midst of the pandemic. So that's a really cool, visioning is a really cool tool. Ellen has made a comment here I just want to share. She says, love the idea of allocating open time with nothing on it. This may have been a reply to the question you answered before. Maybe it's time to work on the biz or on yourself. Maybe it's time to pick up the guitar, and maybe it's successful just to have open time without a list of productivity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Elena has a great question here. Is there a recommended balance for wellness of in, on, and self?
Not that I know of. I'm sure people have come up with some balance pieces, but I would say it's where do you want to spend your time? I often will use Ari as the example on this because I've taught this content with him many a time. And he's up at 6:37 in the morning, and he's journaling at one of the businesses, and then he's doing meetings, and then he's talking and doing stuff until about 1, 2 in the afternoon. And then he goes on a run for a little while, and then he comes back, he has a light snack, and then he goes into the roadhouse and pours water until 9:30 or 10, and then goes home and has dinner. If I'm doing the math there correctly, if it's just in the business work, he's there from somewhere around 7 until 2, which is 7 till 2 is 7 hours. And then 4:30 or 5 until 9 is another 4 or 5 hours. So he's at 10 or 11 hours a day that he's working in the business. That's not my choice, but it makes him incredibly happy. So I think what the real key is, and the reason I have you do that kind of thinking about allocation, what is the balance you are choosing? Right? For me, when I had toddlers, it was a very different work-home balance of what I wanted to do, because there's experiences you have with toddlers only once. And now that I have teens, it's a different level of engagement because they're engaged with other people and don't need or even want me to be as present in their lives. Right? So dinner is important, but it's not dinner and a whole evening. It's dinner and then I can do some more work. So it's reallocating and thinking, what am I choosing to do now? Whether it be month to month or this 6 months. It could even be in that vision of what does it look like and what do my relationships look like? I know that Val, one of our employees at Mailorder, actually wrote in her vision, she allocated her time out, that it's 50 hours a week and this amount of time is in the office and this amount of time is at home. Being really clear with what you are choosing to do. Because we have preferences. Now, some of us have preferences that might be our choice. Some of them have preferences of you need to be in the seat for 40 hours. You need to be pushing the widget maker for this many hours. Okay, then you can do that, and then you can allocate what does home and self look like? Where am I finding these percentages? But unfortunately, I don't have a here's the ideal kind of happy place, because each of us have different things. If you go back to the chat, you'll see all sorts of variations of in, on, and self, and kind of what that looks like. And I bet if we did work, home, and self, you'd have all sorts of them too. But intentionally choosing what am I going to be happy with over a month, not a day or a week, but over a month or a couple of months. Do I feel like I've got the balance that I'm really looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Deb had a question here. A person existing in Q1 and Q2, striving to set boundaries and reallocate time, must deal with others, family and work colleagues who are resisting these changes. Do you have any suggestions?
So thinking about changes, they work our change process, bottom line change, which we're teaching, I think, coming up very soon. Mara, you can help me on that date. The idea of this, of kind of getting people and getting those compelling reasons. What are the ideas of why we want to do this change and it's going to make it better? How does it look when it is fixed? I think is one of the tools that we can use to really engage and focus on helping people, other people, understand why we're reallocating or why we're moving things. How are we making it possible to get better? And you can get their feedback and incorporate their feedback so they feel part of that change and be able to really think through and intentionalize the change process so that they're all feeling ready. And so then they see the change is beneficial instead of something you're putting on them or asking them to do without their consent.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
Yes, you can let us know in the chat. I was just looking, the next time we have bottom line change is July 15th.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can drop that link in the chat. Thank you, Deb, for that question. You can let us know if you have any follow-up questions. Lizzie has asked, any questions of how to bring around colleagues to higher level priorities instead of focusing on time-consuming details that have less impact on moving the organization forward?
Sorry, I'm thinking for a moment.
That's fine.
I think sometimes it's trying to get clear on the outcomes of what you're working on at that point. To me, thinking about if we're having a meeting, so if I was meeting with Emily and Mara, what is the goal of this meeting? Right, and so get clear of that at the beginning. So then as we go through the hour meeting, if we start to dig down onto one thing, like, oh, the font should be this, and then we should have this as a background color, this, we could say, wait a minute, is this where we want to get by the end of this meeting, or is that something else? And so getting clear on the outcomes before we start that project or discussion or conversation, I think can be really helpful. In getting people not so mired in the details, but making sure we have the top layer done, and then we can reallocate time for what are those next step details, because the details are very important sometimes, but we want to get there when we are choosing to, not when we do that as a tangent, because it's really easy to talk about those things because we don't want to make the high level decisions. Right. And so I would say in that meeting, having a clear agenda, here's the outcomes, or in those discussions saying, here's what we're working on right now. Until we answer this, we can't answer this.
Yeah.
That's my best guess on that one at this point, my best answer at the moment.
Yeah. No, thank you. Liz, you can let us know if you have any follow-ups. Kristen asks, she says, I manage a team of a 24/7 service team. How can you set boundaries while being respectful of night provider shifts and schedules?
Right. So you have individuals who are working at shift times and you're managing them and you're not there. So how do you not get phone calls, random things that are set up in order to interrupt your time, because that's maybe your home or self time that you're engaging with. So thinking about that idea, thinking about what is available. So not thinking about what I can't do, but offering what I can do. Maybe I say I get up at 6. So if you have questions, please make sure they're in my email box by 6. I'll get back to you immediately. So we tell them what I can do or operate with. Maybe you can say I have half an hour between 10:30 and 11 that I'll answer anything that's immediate or urgent. If you text me, it'll be during this time. So putting in some boundaries or some kind of spaces to say, I know I've allocated this time. And then giving yourself some important things, some space outside of that, because you're 24 hours of saying, maybe you have a 2-hour lunch because I'm working at these other times. So I can go for a run or for a walk or do some of that reading in the middle of the day, which doesn't feel regular, but allocating some of those times intentionally that you feel comfortable with. If you're a night owl, saying, hey, from 11 to 12, totally there because I'm awake and I want to make sure you're good. After 12, though, I'm not going to deal with it until 8 a.m. So I think it is locking in kind of what you want, and then getting feedback from them saying, okay, 12 to 8, that's too long to wait. We can do 12 to 6. Okay, I don't love that, but we can balance it maybe 12 to 7 and negotiate. Think about what you can do in that moment.
Yeah.
Thinking about that idea.
Absolutely.
So thanks for that question.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. Laura had a great point here too. She said, one of the most impactful things I've heard that clicked for me in time management was use your no's to protect your yeses. It really hits home the point that we are capable of being, or we are capable, not we are incapable, we are capable of being in control, which I really like.
I will say we all have that 24 hours a day. And in response to Laura's, it's how we choose to use it.
Yeah.
Right? We're choosing all the time, and thinking about making that choice is intentional and focused and in alignment with where we want to be is the effort of time management. It's not so much how can I fit more in, but how do I choose to spend my time to get the results that I really want? And opening up those results to not just include work, but home and self.
Yeah, absolutely. Elena asks, any recommendations for an existing high functioning staff when onboarding a new leader, i.e. a change of a boss for everyone?
In thinking about having that new boss, ideally having some orientations of having some of those meetings and saying, here's how things are currently working. Right, and having them share this functional team saying, here's how we're working and here's how we're successful, and having a facilitated meeting of what does success look like for our time? Like, how does our team function? What are the things that have been working? And then what are some opportunities? And asking that leader to wait and observe and watch for a little bit and absorb, because there's some things that are really functional right now. And even though he may have, or she may have some great new ideas, thinking about for that moment of saying, how can I wait for a moment to see how things are working before immediately asking for a difference? Mm-hmm. So some intentionality of, hey, here's where we're working, trying to do some protection. If you're kind of one of those employees and saying, hey, we've got some really good things going, we'd like you to see how those work. And then we're open to some new things once you've seen how we work, to some possibilities of some negotiated change in order to be even more effective. You're hired because you're great. You're going to be our new leader, but we want to make sure that we don't lose ourselves to you as a new leader of this team.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Thank you, everyone, for these questions. We do have time for maybe one or two more, if any do come in, if you want to send those through. If not, we can wrap things up. Okay, Jessica, how can you then plan for the unknown or the spontaneous happenings?
Right. So, I mean, you can't. There's always going to be the, oh my goodness, right? I was thinking about it as I was driving up north. Like, if all of a sudden I had a boat that I was supposed to be on at 2 p.m., I left at 9 a.m., so I gave myself 45 minutes of extra time. What happens if I get a flat tire? What happens if there's a traffic accident that slows me down for an hour? What happens if? There's always going to be the what happens ifs. And they're going to throw things off. But I would say, thinking about if we've allocated, some time and said, okay, here's what we're going to try to do today, and something comes up and you have to go to work in the business, maybe you reallocate some time later. But we know those urgent and important things pop up. They're fires that need to be put out immediately. We can't just leave a fire in the office. We're like, no, I'm on my self time. I'm not going to go get the fire extinguisher. I'm working on myself. We're going to go do those things, but we want to then think about, where is that balance? Where is that opportunity for me to do something that I might have had previously scheduled that I can reallocate to maybe myself or working on the business? So I think it's really trying, as I said, it's not balance in a day-to-day. We're not going to get 70, 75, 5 every single day. But if our goal is 70, 20, 10, how does that look over a week? We have one day that's all urgent because Mondays at our business is crazy and it's all in the business. Okay, well then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, how are we reallocating and thinking about making some space for the other ones to get that in alignment with our goal?
Yeah, great point. Great point. Okay, I think we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you, everyone, so much for the engaging and active chat and the great questions that came through, and for spending your time with us today. We really appreciate it. And Timo, thank you for your time. If any questions do come up, feel free to send those our way at zingtrain@zingermans.com. Also, you can just reply to the invitation. That will go right to me. I'm happy to answer any questions or send those along to Timo. We'd love to hear what you thought of today's webinar. So Mara, if you don't mind, if you haven't already, there it is, dropping it again. We'd love to hear what you think. We'd love to hear what you thought of today, what you'd like to hear about us more, future webinars. We're always looking for inspiration. We're going to be sending the recording of today's presentation to you, as well as the slides. I know a few folks have asked for those as well. And you'll be getting those probably in your inboxes tomorrow, early tomorrow morning. And thank you. Thanks, everyone. We're gonna wrap it up. Enjoy the rest of your day, whatever time it may be. And thanks for joining us. Thanks, Timo.
Yeah. See you all later. Can't wait to hear how you do.
Bye, everyone.